So good afternoon. As you all know, later today, the President will be delivering remarks on how his Build Back Better Act will lower prescription drug prices for millions of Americans. Ahead of these remarks, the President is currently meeting with some of the 1 in 4 Americans who take prescription drugs and struggle to afford them, and he'll talk about that in his remarks today. He will discuss their conversation and the plights of the people he's meeting with. The 3 people he's meeting with struggle to pay for insulin, even rationing doses. These stories are all too common. Nearly 30% of Americans who take prescription drugs have skipped a dose. The President's Build Back Better Act will provide relief to Americans struggling to pay for their prescription drugs, and for good reason. Americans pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, often 2 to 3 times as much as citizens from other developed countries. That includes many medicines that were invented long ago and cost very little to make, such as insulin, which was invented a century ago and costs only a few dollars to make, but whose cost has skyrocketed in recent years, often to over $1,000. The President's Build Back Better Act will cap the cost of insulin to $35 a month, limit seniors' prescription drug expenses to $2,000 a year, empower Medicare to negotiate down prices for some of the most expensive drugs, penalize drug companies that raise the cost of medicines more than inflation, lower costs for seniors by ensuring they never pay more than $2,000 a year for drugs under Medicare Part D, and expand health care coverage to millions more Americans. He also isn't waiting to take action. He's already acted to bring down the cost of prescription drugs with an executive order that increases competition, which will lower prescription drug costs, directed the FDA to get less expensive generic drugs to consumers faster, and ordered the FDA to work with states and tribes to import drugs safely from Canada. This is expected to save Coloradans, for example, 60% of their drug expenses. So you hear the President talk more about that later this afternoon. Also, just wanted to provide a quick update on our booster program. To date, the United States has administered more than 47 million boosters. Just in the last week, we've seen strong demand for boosters, with close to 7 million Americans getting their booster in the past week. This is critical to ensuring Americans have the best protection against COVID-19 as we head into the winter. And as part of our comprehensive push on boosters, this week CMS will issue email booster reminders to the more than 14 million people that receive Medicare emails. It will also launch booster reminders at the beginning of calls to its 1-800 line, which receives more than 2 million calls per month. Amr, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. First, just on the Olympics and the diplomatic boycott. Several reports the President has decided to move forward with the move. Is that correct, that he's come to this decision?
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. The athletes on Team USA have our full support. We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home, but we will not be contributing to the fanfare of the Games. U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that. As the President has told President Xi, standing up for human rights is in the DNA of Americans. We have a fundamental commitment to promoting human rights, and we feel strongly in our position, and we will continue to take actions to advance human rights in China and beyond.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has already suggested that there will be countermeasures, firm countermeasures, I believe the term that they used. Have they indicated to the administration yet what sort of action that they might take for this move?
Well, I don't have anything to read out in terms of their intentions or what they would convey from officials from the PRC. But our view is that's not the right way to view or frame our relationship. Our view is that cooperation on transnational issues is not a favor to us. It is not a transaction. The PRC should be taking action on issues where the global community, to meet the needs of the global community. And that's what they should do in order to be a part of leadership in the global community. So I don't have anything to read out on their front. They can certainly speak for themselves.
Can you walk us through a little bit of the logistics of tomorrow's video meeting with President Putin? Just everything from who will be in the room on the U.S. side, how much time has been blocked out for the meeting, and how much do you expect to be focused on Ukraine, versus Iran, cybersecurity, some of the other issues of tension or mutual interest in the relationship?
Sure. Well, I'm certain we will put out a list of the delegation who will be attending. I can see if that's something that we can provide to all of you later this afternoon, and I can also check on the logistics of how much time is blocked out for the meeting. In terms of the focus of the meeting, as was announced when we announced it this weekend, is an opportunity for the President to underscore, of course, U.S. concerns with Russian military activities on the border with Ukraine and reaffirm the United States support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's also an opportunity to discuss a range of topics in the U.S. and Russia relationship, including strategic stability, cyber, and regional issues. But you can certainly expect that our concerns about the military activities on the border will be a prominent part of the discussion. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Should Americans be prepared for the likelihood to see American forces on the ground in the region in the event that Russia does invade?
I'm not going to get ahead of the President's conversations with his transatlantic partners, which is going to happen later this afternoon, and we'll provide you a list of who will be participating in that call as soon as those scheduling details are finalized. But I would say that our objective here, Cecilia, is conveying diplomatically that this is the moment for Russia to pull back their military buildup at the border, that diplomacy is the right path forward here, but that we are going to continue to coordinate closely with our partners, our transatlantic partners, on a range of economic sanctions and steps that couldn't be taken should President Putin decide to move forward.
And how would the White House characterize relations with Russia heading into this call right now?
I think our objective from the beginning of the President's time in office has not been to escalate the relationship, but has been to move to a more stable footing in the relationship. But certainly that means that we can raise concerns where we have them, specifically about areas like the military buildup we've seen on the border in Ukraine. Many of us lived through a similar playbook back in 2014. And the President is not going to hold back in conveying his concern and also conveying our conversations and our preparations should they be warranted. We don't know that President Putin has made a decision. We don't know that yet. But that's why this is an opportunity to have a conversation. But there's also an opportunity in this call to have a conversation about a range of topics where there can be mutual interest, whether it's Iran's nuclear capabilities as a member of the P5+1 talks and what that looks like moving forward, and other strategic stability issues where we have worked together in the past.
Just very quickly on China, if I may, is a diplomatic boycott enough given the human rights abuses?
Well, let me first say, everybody can call it whatever they want to call it. I would just remind you that often when you use diplomatic boycott, that phrase, that brings people back to 1980, and we are not. The athletes will be participating. We will be rooting for the athletes from home. I am an Olympics-obsessed person, so I'm looking forward to doing that. But I think this is just an indication that it cannot be business as usual, that not sending a diplomatic delegation sends that message. That does not mean, I think this was your question, just to come back to it, that that is the end of the concerns we will raise about human rights abuses in Xinjiang. We've already taken a number of steps. We've been a leader in the world in leading actions through the G7. We're obviously also working with Congress, but this is just sending a message that given these human rights abuses, we cannot proceed with business as usual. Go ahead.
Are you trying to get other allies to join the United States in this diplomatic boycott?
Well, Steve, we have informed them of our decision, and obviously we will leave it to them to make their own decisions.
Why not pull American athletes from the Olympics?
I don't think that we felt it was the right step to penalize athletes who have been training, preparing for this moment, and we felt that we could send a clear message by not sending an official U.S. delegation.
And on the Putin call, how specific will the president be with Putin on what the consequences will be if there's an invasion?
I think the president will be clear, as we have conveyed publicly, that we have been preparing a range of economic sanctions or economic options that could have a detrimental impact on the Russian economy. In terms of what level of detail, I will leave the president the space to do that himself. Go ahead.
On those potential sanctions, obviously European partners have different equities here, particularly on the energy side of things. Will these all be done in concert with transatlantic allies, or is there a possibility that the U.S. would operate some on a unilateral basis?
It's a great question, Phil, and I think the president is going to have this conversation with a number of key partners this afternoon. Obviously, it's important to us to move in coordination and in lockstep with our transatlantic partners and allies, but I don't want to rule anything in or out before those conversations are had.
On the domestic front, Senator Schumer sent a letter to his colleagues this morning making clear that his deadline of Christmas to finish Build Back Better still stands at this point in time. Seems like there's still a lot of work to do. Is that a deadline you guys subscribe to, would like to see, or could you see it going further than that?
Well, as you noted in his Dear Colleague letter, very Washington term, Leader Schumer made clear today that he's moving full speed ahead, and that he outlined in very specific wonky Hill detail that I'm sure you of all people appreciate, Phil, all of the work happening behind the scenes. Obviously, we're engaged in that, but we certainly support Leader Schumer's effort and push to move this forward and get it done in the coming weeks.
I guess what I'm asking is Christmas drop dead, or can this be something that moves past Christmas if the legislative realities make that the case?
I certainly understand why you're asking. We have many conversations and briefings between now and Christmas. So we're just encouraged by Leader Schumer's effort to move this forward, all of the work happening behind the scenes among staffers, among members, to move this forward and get it done. Go ahead, Ashley.
Thank you. Jen, on the Democracy Summit, can you explain why countries such as Hungary, which is an EU member, and Turkey, which is a NATO member, are not invited, while other countries like the Philippines and Pakistan, which has an especially egregious record on human rights, are included?
Sure. Well, the Democracy Summit that will happen later this week is an opportunity to bring together U.S. officials, civil society leaders, and foreign leaders who represent a diverse array of experiences to talk about strengthening democracy, defending against authoritarianism, fighting corruption, and promoting respect for human rights. Inclusion or an invitation is not a stamp of approval on their approach to democracy, nor is exclusion a stamp of the opposite of that, of disapproval. So it's just meant to have a broad scope of leaders, a broad scope of private sector and civil society officials represented.
To follow up on that briefly, there's sort of the roughly 110 countries you've invited, there's a group of about a dozen or so that are a little, to use a non-wonky term, cuspy, right? They feel like they could kind of go either way. Can you just give a little thinking on how those decisions were made when there was a debate over a country?
Sure. I mean, I would say, broadly speaking, that this is an opportunity, again, not to celebrate everything we've done on democracy, either for the United States or all of these countries, and call it a day. It's an opportunity to continue to strive to do better. The president feels that, democracy is always a work in progress. You're always trying to make yourself better, to lead better, to push other countries to be better, and this is an opportunity to do exactly that. So understand, of course, the interest in the invite list, but it's not meant to be, again, a stamp of approval or disapproval, just meant to have a diverse range of voices and faces and representatives at the discussion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. You mentioned that Biden was obviously deeply involved with the Ukraine in 2014, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could talk about what his takeaways are from that experience, because a lot of the things that he's saying this time, supporting NATO allies on the eastern flank, sanctions, those sound like the same things that you guys tried to do in 2014, and it didn't stop Russia from taking Crimea. So why does he think this will be different?
Well, I think first, our objective at this point, Mara, is of course to prevent them from moving forward and to convey on the front end that we have been working in lockstep and in coordination with Congress, with countries, our NATO partners, with transatlantic partners to prepare a range of steps that could be detrimental to their economy. I would say that there are some certainly lessons learned or things that we've watched and seen that we certainly saw back in 2014, a massive spike more than tenfold in social media activity pushing anti-Ukrainian propaganda, approaching levels last seen in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014. That was something that didn't have a lot of past precedent at the time, but to us, we see that as an indication of efforts to influence inside and outside, of course, as well. We've also seen evidence, as we've noted here, of Russia making plans for significant aggressive moves against Ukraine. So I would say our objective, or the president's objective, is to, on the front end, always lead with diplomacy, have those conversations. We're having them directly with Russian leaders. The Secretary of State obviously met with his counterpart last week, and we're having those at a range of levels. The president speaking with President Putin tomorrow. But in the meantime, to prepare a range of options should they decide to move forward.
Why will your efforts this time be more successful than last time? Why do you think they will be?
Well, we will see if they are. But our objective, first and foremost, is to prevent the move forward, the military progression that we saw happen in 2014.
I have one quick question on testing. Last week, obviously, the president explained some ramp up in testing, but there's still a lot of countries like Germany and the UK and South Korea that basically have massive testing free of charge or for a nominal fee. Why can't that be done in the United States?
Well, I would say first, we have 8 tests that have been approved by the FDA here. We see that as the gold standard. Whether or not all of those tests would meet that standard is a question for the scientists and medical experts, but I don't suspect they would. Our objective is to continue to increase accessibility and decrease costs. And if you look at what we've done over the course of time, we've quadrupled the size of our testing plan. We've cut the cost significantly over the past few months, and this effort to ensure insurers you're able to get your tests refunded means 150 million Americans will be able to get free tests.
Complicated though. Why not just make them free and give them out and have them available everywhere?
Should we just send one to every American?
Maybe.
Then what happens if every American has one test? How much does that cost, and then what happens after that?
All I know is that other countries seem to be making them available in greater quantities for less money.
Well, I think we share the same objective, which is to make them less expensive and more accessible, right? Every country is going to do that differently. And I was just noting that, again, our tests go through the FDA approval process. That's not the same process that it doesn't work that way in every single country. But what we're working to do here is build on what we've done to date and continue to build out our testing capacity because, Mara, we absolutely recognize that this is a key component of fighting the virus. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. On Russia first, you said that the goal is to prevent Putin from invading. So what is President Biden willing to threaten in this phone call will happen if Russia invades, just beyond more sanctions?
Well, again, I think that it's not about threats. It's about conveying that the right path forward here is through diplomacy. In the meantime, on financial sanctions, we've consulted significantly with our allies and believe we have a path forward that would impose significant and severe harm on the Russian economy. You can call that a threat, you can call that a fact, you can call that preparation, whatever you want to call it. But that is something we've talked about publicly, and certainly the president would convey that as well.
Is President Biden prepared to warn that there's the possibility of U.S. military involvement if Russia invades Ukraine?
Again, I'm not going to get ahead of the president's conversation, but that is not our first objective. I would note that in the past, if you look back at 2014, that one of the outcomes here, if they were to decide to move forward, is that the other countries in the eastern flank, in many of them NATO partners, will be looking for reassurance from the United States. That's something that was a follow-up to 2014. I'm not sure that is what Russia wants to see, but that would be a natural consequence if they were to move forward as well.
And then on China, did the White House consider going a step further and barring U.S. athletes from participating in the games?
I'm not going to get into additional considerations. All I can convey to you is where we landed and the decision that was made and why.
And why did you make that particular decision? Why not bar Why not go further and bar U.S. athletes from the games?
Because not sending a U.S. delegation sends a clear message that we cannot conduct ourselves with business as usual, that we are not in a state where business as usual is appropriate at a time where there are human rights abuses that we have been outspoken about, that we have taken actions on, and we feel this sends a clear message. At the same time, we believe U.S. athletes, people who have been training, giving up a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, preparing for these Olympics, should be able to go and compete, and we look forward to cheering for them from home. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. On the violent crime spike that we've been seeing,